Hi, everyone. Welcome to Inspire to Run podcast. Today, we're here with Dana DeSutter. Dana is the founder of Namastride, an ACE certified personal trainer, RYT200 Certified Yoga Teacher through the Marianne Wells Yoga School, and an avid runner. She has run 3 marathons and a number of half marathons. After dealing with injuries throughout marathon training during her first and second marathons, she decided to incorporate a more consistent yoga practice into her training plan. She saw mental and physical benefits and decided to become a yoga teacher so she could share yoga with other runners. Welcome to the show, Dana.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you here as well and really talk about the topic of yoga. It's a topic that we brought on the show really early on, I think when I first launched the show. And it's something that personally I've wanted to incorporate into my own training plan. And I've done it a little bit, but not consistently and not to the extent that I'd like to. And I'm sure there are other runners out there that may have tried in the past or maybe just don't know the benefits of yoga. So let's just kind of jump into the conversation and learn a little bit about you. I know you're first a runner, so let's kind of start the story there in terms of how you became a runner.
Yeah, so I've been running most of my life. I was fortunate enough to have parents that were into running. My dad was a good runner in high school. He ran the 2 mile and the mile. And my mom, I remember when I was a little kid, she would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go meet friends to run before helping us get ready for school. And so having that was a great thing for me to see and inspire me. And I was able to join track in 6th grade. That was the earliest you could join. So got to do that. I started out as a miler too, in the spirit of what my dad did, but realized that I was more of a middle distance runner. I loved the 400, the 200, but it's harder, in my opinion, to do that as an adult. So when I went to college, I decided to do distance running. I had a cousin that we went to the same school, and she was training for a half marathon that they had every spring. So I did my first one my freshman year of college. And then my college roommate started running marathons after college, and we ran one together. So I guess I've been fortunate to have other people that are into running, and I've kind of said, oh, sure, I'll try that. And here I am still running. I said after my first marathon, I'd never do one again. And I've done 2 more, and I hope to do all of the majors.
Oh, that's incredible. Well, we're going to have to talk about all the majors because I have a story about that. But, really incredible journey. And I didn't start running as early as you did. I started in high school, and I could certainly resonate with, having that community or having others, run with you, because I think that was probably part of why I didn't run that much after high school. And I only ran a little bit as part of my workouts, but I didn't run races and I didn't train in that way for a really long time, just not until a few years ago. So definitely can resonate with that, kind of having that community.
Yeah, that's been instrumental for me. I've moved a lot. So I found that in every city I've moved to, there's so many running communities. A lot of them are free. So it's really great. You can meet people, and it's a little cost you need to pay for your running shoes. And time is probably the biggest constraint for a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. And then, let's dive into the marathons for just a moment because I'm so excited to talk about this. So I was a cross country runner in high school, and I did track, and I very much preferred cross country, but never considered myself a long distance runner, right? So for me, it was anything more than a 5K. And then I started running longer distances just a few years ago as part of my own journey with obstacle course races and, working with a running coach and, kind of doing a little bit more than I've done in the past. And I ran my first half marathon maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and I've run a few since then. And now I'm thinking about my first marathon. But just the other day, I'm like, wow, if I run my first marathon, let's say New York City, which is one I'm really excited to run, what if, over the next 5 years, I run the other 5, major marathons? So it's cool that you said that, and we're going to have to keep in touch on that topic because this is something that's interesting for me.
Yeah, it's exciting. And I'm at 0 right now of them, but I might do Chicago this fall. I haven't signed up yet, but I think there are still some charity spots, so looking to do that.
Very cool. So during your marathon journey, I read in your bio that you started to experience some challenges, right? Some obstacles kind of through that journey. So talk to us a little bit about, what you were going through the marathons and how did that lead you to kind of the work that you're doing today?
Yeah, so my first marathon, I dealt with a lot of injuries, mostly muscle tightness, but it was pretty bad. And part of that is a product of when I did track, I was a jumper, so just body imbalances. And I think everyone can relate. Our bodies are not perfectly, we're perfectly imperfect, but we're not perfectly aligned, perfectly balanced. And for me, that really came out when I was training for the marathon and doing long miles. My left side's weaker. It always has been. Um, and so I worked with a chiropractor, and he was good about getting me into the weight room and doing things. But I wanted to understand what I could do, and so first off, I became a personal trainer. I loved learning about how the body works. I have a business background, so for me, learning anatomy and all about the human body was really fascinating and very different from what I studied. And I guess as part of that and thinking about long term, there's continuing education credits that are required. I tried to think about what I wanted to do for my personal training niche. And I lived close to a yoga studio in Houston that a girl I lived with, she loved it. So I started going to it, and I started seeing that when I went to yoga, I was doing movements that even going to the weight room, I felt different. I was able to target smaller muscle groups more easily. I felt more aligned, more in balance, and also just felt more in tune with my body and had a better understanding of what is going on. And so that's kind of what got me to where I am today and how I dealt with my injuries. And it was kind of a process of figuring out what worked. And yoga seemed to be the thing that adding to training that worked for me.
Okay. And I've heard this before, in the other conversations that I've had with yoga. So I'm really interested to learn more about like what specifically about yoga can help, in this area. And then a lot of questions about what type of yoga we should be doing as runners and how do we fit it all in, with
Mm-hmm.
our training and everything else. So maybe we'll start with the first part about like I know you mentioned it helps you target maybe smaller muscle groups.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's one way, but kind of what are the big ways did you think that yoga helps runners in that way?
Well, I think the strength component, going to the weight room is great. I do that too when I can, but I like that with yoga, I can get strength training in. I can also get mobility, the way you move your body, and also do relaxation and restoration. And you can do all of those things in one yoga class. There's different styles of yoga that focus on strength or focus on restoration. But in one yoga class, you can get everything. You warm up, you cool down. Usually, the style I teach, it's an easy warm up, get your body moving, and then go through some gentle stretches and build up to where you're doing strength. It's full body. And then at the end, do more of the relaxation, restorative poses. So for me, my favorite time to do yoga is after a long run. And usually those, your legs are tired, but a long yoga session can feel really good, letting you cool down. It can help reduce inflammation. So there's all sorts of benefits. Those are the big ones for me. Strength, mobility, and recovery are the big ones.
Okay. Okay. And I know that. Well, I don't know. I think that the way you look at yoga is more than just stretching, right? It's in those
Mm-hmm.
areas that you talked about, the strength, et cetera. So, how would someone fit this in to if they have, let's say, I'm running 5, 6 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, my long runs are maybe 2 or 3 days a week, maybe just not one day. And then
Mm-hmm.
other days I'm doing more speed work, as an example. So how would I fit? How would I think about this? Would I do that strength and relaxation every time I do yoga, or would I do relaxation on certain days and do the whole thing on other days? Like how are you thinking about like how runners should fit that into a
Mm-hmm.
schedule?
Uh, so two answers. One is a thing I really like about yoga is it's flexible and you can make it what works for you. So I don't say there's one size fits all. What I like to do is on rest days, if it's a true rest day, I will sometimes do a gentle yoga session. I'll just stretch, relax. I may not even stand up. I may just lay on the mat and hold poses for a long time, whatever feels good. If I have a cross training or strength day, that's usually when I do more of the intense yoga. You can get your heart rate up pretty high in yoga. It may not be a true cross training, but sometimes for me, if I am limited on time, rather than cross training, I'll do yoga, because I think for me personally, I get more out of it than I would from getting on a bike. And then, like I mentioned too, after a long run, I like to do a long yoga session. Usually on the weekends, if you have a morning, you get up early and run, you can spend some time afterwards, and mostly do recovery those days. But I also will do some strength too, because usually after a long run, you have a recovery run or rest day after that. So you have a little bit more time to recover from that too. Time is a constraint, even for me. I don't do yoga every day. I wish I did, but I've realized that 5 or 10 minutes is better than nothing. So in the morning after a run, even when I'm getting ready for work, sometimes when I'm in the bathroom, I'll stand and do some stretches and, go through breath work and do that to multitask. It's not the best way to do it, but it's better than nothing in my opinion. Or just thinking, okay, can I really not make 5 minutes to do this? And I think having that mindset of it's just 5 minutes and building up to a longer period of time is helpful, rather than trying to do 60 minutes of yoga every day while you're trying to run 60 minutes every day.
That's a really great point, because I'm just thinking about the times where I was doing my base or my build sessions over the course of a few weeks, and I'm running like 6 or 7 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can imagine, that's an hour a day on average, which it's not that, right? It's more, because some days I'm running for longer. And then to think about, okay, I have to stretch and I have to do 30 or 60 minutes of yoga. So the idea that it's hard, right? If you're trying to fit this in. Mm-hmm. So I love what you said about that. Like, you could start small. You could start with that 5 to 10 minutes to get it in, just to kind of build that habit. And then over time, if you're able to work it into your schedule, work through longer sessions, right? And I love how you have that one day where you have that long session and then you work it into your other workouts.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about, like, how does someone get started with yoga? I think it's just like with running, right? If you see someone who runs a 5K and you don't run today, you're like, oh, I could never do that. And so you see some of the yoga poses and you're wondering, like, how does someone even get started and kind of build up to that? What are your recommendations?
So I'm thinking about when I started yoga. I grew up in a really small town. We didn't have a yoga studio. I didn't really know what yoga was. So when I started, I went to a studio that I grew to like, but I remember my first class, it was a hot yoga studio. There were all like a lot of people that clearly did yoga all the time. And a lot of the poses, there's an English term, but then there's a Sanskrit term. And a lot of times in a class, they'll just use that. And I was like, I don't know what any of this means. So I think going to a studio can be great. I love that YouTube and online platforms are available. I have a YouTube page and I try to make it accessible for everyone. And I feel like it's a safe space to get started. So you can learn about what equipment do I need to do yoga. For me, I think a mat is great. When I started, I got like a cheap mat at like TJ Maxx or Marshalls. I was like, I don't know what I need. And then I realized I wanted the nicer one. They last for a long time. I like blocks, straps, and bolsters. Those are the things I use. You can use a pillow instead of a bolster. You can use books instead of blocks, and a towel instead of a strap. So I think a lot of people think, oh, it's going to be expensive. Yoga is expensive. It can be, that's true, but you can also make it work with your lifestyle. And I travel a lot. I'm not traveling with all these things, so I make it work in a hotel. So that's one way to start. Try to just understand, what are the basics? What do I need to get started? And try out a YouTube video. Do it at home. No one's around. The other thing I will say is when you go to a yoga studio, talk to the teachers. They're there to teach. They're there to help you. And I would say from my experience too, everyone is focused on themselves and what they're doing. So if you think you're making a fool of yourself, no one else is paying attention. And yoga is all about non-judgment. So if someone's judging you, then that's on them.
For sure. And, we say the same thing about, running, right? It's your race, it's your pace, folks are typically supportive and cheering you on, but more than likely they're focused on their own runs and their own races. So I can definitely
Um,
understand that. And then, now that you brought up YouTube and doing the work that you're doing with the video, so let's talk a little bit about that. So you've not only incorporated yoga in your own training plan, but you started this business, Namastride, and you moved to online with YouTube. So talk a little bit about the work that you're doing there.
yeah, so I guess talking about my yoga teacher journey, I've talked about my yoga journey a little bit, but I went through the Marianne Wells Yoga School. So Marianne and Ron do yoga teacher trainings. I got to do it in Costa Rica, which was amazing. Great place to spend for a couple weeks. But I didn't know what I wanted to do with teaching. It was more just curiosity and wanting to learn. I started teaching in some studios, and then COVID happened, and I was virtual. A lot of studios were having people teach virtual. I do have a full-time job, so that was a challenge. So I stopped teaching during that time. When I went to grad school, I had classmates that I taught, and that was a lot of fun. I realized that I really missed teaching. I was also fortunate enough that school had a program where you could look into starting a business. So I had kind of thought about like, oh, I want to do something more with yoga. And so that was the time that I really thought about what do I want to do. And I love running. I think yoga has helped my running. And so that's how Namastride started. And recently I've moved to just having videos on YouTube. I do things on Instagram, but I'm trying to make yoga accessible to runners. We've talked about it can be challenging and daunting to try to find the time. So I've made a lot of short 5-10 minute videos that, sometimes I'll do my own videos. It's 5 minutes, quick, can turn it on, but get a little bit of benefit. So it was a little bit of a self-serving business, I guess, because I am a runner, but I really wanted to share the benefits with other people as well.
I think that's the best, right? I mean, you know what you need as a runner, and you want to help other runners through this. So, yeah, even though you say it's self-serving, I think that it's a very good purpose that you have and mission that you have. So, a couple of questions. One is I'm very curious about the name Namastride. How did that come about?
I was part of the business startup class I was doing. I was trying to figure out a name, and I have a personal Instagram as well, and it was Yogi on the Run. And I was like, man, that's kind of a mouthful for a business name. Trying to think, and I was just brainstorming, and that came to me. I was like, oh, like Namaste and Stride running, that could work. So I asked a few people. It might go over some people's heads. It's maybe confusing to some people, but I thought it was funny. If you know me well, I love a good pun, so I thought it was a good fit for me.
I love it. I love it. So I appreciate you sharing that. And, one of the questions that I like to ask our guests on the show is, through this journey, whether it's your running journey or starting up Namastride, what would you say was your biggest obstacle, and how'd you overcome it?
I think time for running, for the business, has been the biggest hurdle. I think I overcome it sometimes, and other times not as much. But for me, planning and thinking about having goals is really important. And so with my running journey, sometimes I get stagnant in my running, and I know if I sign up for a race, it will get me back on track. It gives me something to do, a schedule. I don't have to think about it. And with yoga too, there are times when my body lets me know when I'm not doing yoga enough. And so I've found that, sometimes your body requires you to take the time to do things that are important. And so keeping that in mind has also been a way that I've been able to overcome the time challenges.
For sure. And I could totally get the time. Someone asked me the other day, like, how do you do it all? Because, work full time, I volunteer quite a bit for either business associations, or I support nonprofits, podcast, training for, half marathons and maybe a marathon next year. And someone asked me, how do I do it all? I'm like, well, I don't do it all very well all the time, right? So there's certain times where there's certain things that I really put more focus and attention on, and there's certain things that I just say, I'm going to do what I need to do here. And one thing that I've learned this year is around, and this may be what you were talking about in terms of goals, it's really not so much just finding balance, but knowing when to say no to certain things so I could say yes to other things. And then I established those goals around those things that I really want to do that are really important to me. And those are the ones that I go after. So that's kind of my focus this year, because I think I tend to say yes to everything and then I run out of time and I don't do any of it as well as I want to.
Absolutely.
So, I know we talked a little bit about this in terms of time being a barrier and the ways that you overcome it. What do you think are some of the other barriers for a runner to consider yoga? It's all the benefits that comes with it, the strength, the flexibility to help, I don't know if I can go as far as say preventing injuries or helping, recovering from injuries, but so you have all these benefits. What do you think are the barriers besides time for a runner?
A couple things come to mind. One is a lot of people will say like, oh, I'm not flexible. I can't do yoga. And I argue that, well, if you're not flexible, you may arguably need it more. And I am not flexible by any means. In yoga teacher training, I was actually the guinea pig sometimes of like, this is what someone with really tight hamstrings looks like, and this is a modification you have to take, because a lot of people did yoga a lot and they were very flexible. And I realized that it was actually a little bit of an advantage for me. Coming in, I was like, oh man, I'm not flexible. Like, I'm not going to be able to do any of this stuff. And I realized that the general public doesn't necessarily have the flexibility that a lot of yoga teachers do. So I was able to use that to my advantage. So don't let if you have tight hips or hamstrings or whatever it is, don't let that stop you from trying it. I've been doing it for years. I'm not a ton more flexible, but I think I at least keep myself where I want to be. And, when I'm running, I think I help myself not be super stiff. So that's one thing. I think the mental aspect and keeping that in mind is important too. So I think if you just think of yoga as stretching, you're less likely to do it. Whereas if you realize that there are a lot of mental health benefits of yoga too, there's the runner's high. Yoga also has similar benefits. There's endorphins and all of that associated with yoga as well, and reducing stress. So trying that and thinking about that can be another way to overcome the barrier of trying, and just letting yourself be a beginner. I'm still learning all the time, and letting go of the ego and putting yourself out there, whether that's at home or going to a studio, and just trying it out.
Love it. Love it. I love this conversation. You share so many great tips here and insights, thinking back to, making the time to do it, setting goals around it, making a plan. So, incorporating yoga in your training plan ahead of time so you're more likely to do it, having the right tools, doing yoga using videos online so you're in your own space, judgment-free space, and then just kind of how folks or runners should think about yoga, right? Not more than stretching, but also for that flexibility and also for the mental aspect of it. So, and that's something that I don't know if we talked about before. So that's interesting, and I really like that you brought that up. So, let's talk a little bit about what's next for you as a runner, and let's talk about a little bit what's next for Namastride.
As a runner, hopefully running the Chicago Marathon this fall, but I have not signed up yet. I found a training program. I have not used a coach because I do have a pretty demanding job. It's one thing that the unpredictability, I don't want to invest in a coach. I know they're super helpful. I've had tons of friends that have seen success with it, but I'm not there quite yet. But I did find a new training program online that looks fun. And for me, I like to try different programs. I'm a very curious person. I love to learn. If you've probably figured that out through a lot of my responses today, but trying that out and just having fun with it. So that's kind of next for my running journey. And for Namastride, just continue what I'm doing. I'm hoping to this summer post some new videos for people, continue teaching. I've done some online teaching for running clubs. I've done in-person teaching for running clubs. I did a running retreat last year where I taught yoga at. So doing those kind of things, it's a lot of fun for me to do, and I think people enjoy it too, and enjoy learning more about yoga and realizing that it is something that's accessible to pretty much anyone.
Love it. Love it. Dana, thank you so much. I'm really enjoying this conversation. And, another question I like to ask our guests is kind of as we wrap up here is, what is the one thing that you would say to inspire our listeners to run and incorporate yoga?
Oh, that's tough. Um, I think for both is just have fun with it. I think that social media is great and it's not great. You can see so many people trying, see beginners, but there's also the comparison culture that comes into play. And I fall into that as well. But when I'm having fun running, it's, and I'm thinking about it from a fun mindset, it's a really great thing. And I recently this spring I was not running. I was running like 1 or 2 times a week, and then I was trying to run like 5 days a week and running fast, and it was it wasn't fun. And I reset. I slowed down. The past few weeks I've been walking on my runs, and letting go of your ego. That's a very yoga thing to do, and just coming back and saying, I'm not where I was, but I can get there. And I think anyone can do that. You may start walking 100 yards a day, but you'll be surprised what your body can do. And I'm always surprised that even when I lose my fitness, it comes back. And the same for yoga. Be a beginner, learn. You may fall away from it, but come back to it and have fun with it too.
Love it. Love it. Dana, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing this with us. How can our community find you and follow your journey online?
Yes, so Namastride is the handle on Instagram. That's where I'm most active. And I'm also on YouTube. Namastride is the channel as well. That's where all the videos that I have are. And I mentioned earlier, some of them are 5 minutes long, some are more like 45 minutes long. So whatever you're feeling that day, I encourage you to try it. And if you have questions on Instagram, I'm pretty active on there. You can just message me too. I'm always happy to help with whatever I can.
All right. I will put that information in the show notes to make it easy for our listeners to find you. And I can attest that you do respond very well, very quickly on a lot of different topics. So I personally appreciate that. And I'm sure our community will appreciate that once they follow you. So thanks again, Dana, for coming on the show, and good luck at the Chicago Marathon this year.
Thank you. It's been fun. Thanks for having me.